Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to this month's webinar on Luxion's brand new product, KeyVR. So we are very excited to present to you our new product today. It's the first webinar or session we do at all for users. So it's very interesting to see the interest and to see the attendees streaming in. So the topic of this webinar is creating immersive VR product experiences with KeyVR. And by the way, my name is Dries Vervoort. I am a product specialist at Luxion, and I'm based in the Aarhus office in Denmark. So we have a lot to cover today, so I won't waste any time with further presentation. So let's just dive into it. So a few notes before we begin. This session will be recorded and will be made available on YouTube later on. The slideshow I am presenting here right now will also be made available, and so will the KSPs, the KeyShot scenes that I will prepare for KeyVR and KeyShot. They will also be made available for download, so you can try it yourself in KeyVR and KeyShot after this session. A few notes on the hardware. I'm using a workstation with a dual Intel Xeon CPU with 32 gigabytes of RAM, and importantly for KeyVR, it's worth mentioning that I'm using the NVIDIA GeForce RTX 2080 graphics card, and this is all running on a Windows 10 operating system. Unfortunately, I cannot show my current desktop layout, but the VR headset I'm using today for the presentation is an HTC Vive with two Vive controllers. Should you have any questions during this presentation, then please don't hesitate and ask. We have 3 staff members at your disposal to tackle any questions you may have, including Jesper Mosgaard, which is the main developer of the KeyVR product. So definitely, don't hesitate to ask any technical or commercial questions you may have. So for those of you who are not aware of the product or that need a reminder of what we have created, what is KeyVR? KeyVR is a completely new VR experience application that was created by Luxion, the makers of KeyShot. So experience is really the key word here, because VR allows for a very specific kind of interaction with your existing KeyShot scene data. So that's also a unique selling point we have. We do not require complicated setup and preparation. We just leverage whatever data you already have for years of using KeyShot. So KeyVR allows the KeyShot user to be transported into his own or her own KeyShot scene with just one click. And so this is another major factor for us. We want it to be as simple as possible, and the one-click solution just transports you from KeyShot to KeyVR. You can launch KeyVR from KeyShot, or you can use it as a separate application. So that was also an important driver during development. So here's an overview of where the KeyVR button is located. This will be, of course, be shown clearly in the demonstration later on. So why at all would you care about VR? Why would you want to consider KeyVR for your designs? So VR is uniquely positioned for real-time interactive experiences. And it has a very spatial quality that allows for a very unique kind of immersion into your design and your product environments. And because you're basically looking at your design as through your own eyes with the headsets, because of that, you get a true sense of scale. So, and that's something that no other technology really affords. It's a very powerful feature of VR applications. So you really get this sense of exploration where you are really invited to engage with basically your whole body as you move around in the scene with your head, with the headset. So you get different, you can interactively find angles and inspect your design from different views and angles. And of course, you have the controllers which are attached to your arms. So you're basically able to very tangibly interact with your models, as well as materials, animations, environments, and so on. And because it's all real time and the rendering is very fast, basically at 90 images per second, you can make very quick design decisions. More in detail topics for this webinar. I quickly mention these. I have a few notes about recommended hardware to use, because there's, unlike with KeyShot that runs on basically any CPU, for KeyVR you really have to be careful about the graphics card you select for the optimal experience. Then I'll talk about the building blocks of a KeyVR experience, what elements from KeyShot you can leverage inside the KeyVR application. Then a few notes on setting up the scenes, important considerations, things like model scale and how important that is. Then workflows for optimal model structure and materials, how you can work with the tessellation of models, things you need to consider for materials, also documentation to look at, where you can get an overview of supported features. Then there's best practices for optimal scene interactivity. And we also talk and show how physics simulation inside KeyVR can be harnessed and what it can and can't do, or rather how it should be used, or what the intended use case was at least. And then we'll have a lengthy demonstration of the features that were mentioned. And if time allows, we'll have some Q&A. But again, if questions arise now or during the session, then do not hesitate to ask them inside the question section of the GoToWebinar panel. So this is really something I will mention now and a few times over. We have the KeyVR manual, and it's really pretty much the KeyVR first aid kit. So as you get this presentation later on, you can click this link. So it's a very useful resource because it has hardware and OS operating system requirements with exact details of the things you should buy, the steps you should, or to check if your current hardware fits the requirements. It has current and up-to-date capabilities for materials and model features. And perhaps most useful, it also has a quite comprehensive getting started guide that guides you through the whole setup, from hooking up the actual headsets to figuring out the driver settings to actually launching KeyVR and getting started. So it's a very useful resource. So first point, recommended hardware requirements. So a few words first on the operating system support. Running KeyVR requires Windows. So while KeyShot, the product, runs on both Windows and Mac, KeyVR currently is only supported on Windows because the commercially available headsets are only supported on Windows as well. So we support Windows 7 and 10, 64-bit basically. supported GPU. So to get the best possible experience, you obviously need a good headset, good controllers with decent tracking, but maybe more importantly, you need a good GPU, because that's basically the thing that's going to drive the whole experience, that's going to make sure that all the frames are going to be fed smoothly to the headset. So basically, a recent NVIDIA or AMD graphics card will do. But we, as a result of testing, have determined that an NVIDIA GTX 1080 or an AMD Vega 64 card is basically the baseline for the optimal performance. Of course, there are now new cards available, like the NVIDIA RTX generation, and those will obviously be better still. So the reason why you need such a relatively powerful graphics card is that you need the processing power for the complex models, because models can get heavy, and with millions of triangles, you need a beefy graphics card to handle those models and to present them with 90 frames per second, which is really required for the best experience. Another reason why you may want to consider a higher end graphics card is because they tend to have more memory available. So for instance, these two cards, the NVIDIA GTX 1080 and the AMD Vega 64, they both have 8 gigabytes of memory. So you can actually fit quite a lot of models, textures, HDRIs, etc. into the memory. So with that being said, of course, if you have models that are extremely large, like if you have factory layouts of complicated machines, and you do want to put it in KeyVR, then memory can become an issue, or at least an important factor. So if you're worried about possibly running out of GPU memory, then we are officially recommending, Luxion is officially recommending using the NVIDIA Quadro graphics cards line. And the main benefit of the Quadro over the GeForce range is the much larger memory capacity. So for instance, if you look at the Quadro RTX 8000, which is the highest end product, it has a total of 48 gigabytes of GPU memory. So that's a very large amount of memory. So one of those cards can fit extremely large amounts of geometry and textures. So I would almost say with certainty you would almost never run into problems with using one of those cards, because it's just a lot of memory. One note though on those new RTX cards from NVIDIA, which have been making, generating quite a buzz on the internet. They have what is called RT, ray tracing cores and tensor cores. So those can be found on all the Turing RTX cards, and they are currently not leveraged in KeyVR, because KeyVR is doing a lot of rasterization rendering, but it's not doing any ray tracing. So that's something you should at least take note of. Then supported headsets, that's the other important component, of course. So we support the HTC Vive, the Windows Mixed Reality, the Oculus Rift, which is now discontinued, and its replacer, the Oculus Rift S. So the Oculus Rift is supported through the Oculus Desktop, and the HTC Vive and Windows Mixed Reality headsets are supported through the Steam VR. So you would actually have to install Steam for this to work, but this is also explained through the guide I mentioned earlier in our KeyVR First Aid Kit, the manual. So our recommendation though for stationary use, for instance, if you have a fixed workstation where you don't move the hardware between places, is to actually get the HTC Vive. It's got a great quality display. The controllers are very nice to hold, and they generally have very good comfort for most people. However, if you are a nomadic user, and with that I mean a user that like moves offices a lot or does a lot of customer visits where you need to pop out the headset and make a very ad hoc local setup, then the Oculus Rift S is a very nice solution because it's very compact. It has inside-out tracking, which means that unlike the Vive, it does not have these two base stations, so it can do its own tracking. And it's relatively low cost, although all of these headsets are currently priced roughly, at least very, very similar. So it's also important to mention what is not supported. So there's a lot of all-in-one headsets on the market, and I mentioned two of the most popular ones here, but basically any headset that is standalone, which means not tethered to a computer, is not going to be powerful enough to drive the KeyVR product. So neither one of those will actually work. So what are the building blocks of a KeyVR experience? How do you actually do design reviews, or what is necessary to do a proper design review in KeyVR? So basically, the KeyVR building blocks are just the same building blocks of KeyShot. So that means you have models, you have materials, environments, and cameras. And if you have those in the scene, you can actually switch between them and utilize them inside KeyVR. So switching between variations. So when we go one step further, how do you switch between models? How do you switch between materials, environments, cameras? Between models, you have to create model sets. This is also a key component of the configurator in KeyShot, and it's basically the same logic. So switching geometry requires you to have these separate sets of geometry. Switching between materials is done through multi-materials, which gives you a list of, basically a container list within a single material for different options. Environments can be switched by having multiple environments in the environment list, in the environment tab. And the same goes for cameras. So if you have multiple cameras, all of these will be available in the KeyVR product. But I will go into detail about this in the demonstration. So you can also move models. So if you have any model animations that are already set up inside KeyShot, those can actually be played back inside KeyVR. Models that are not locked, and this I will also show later on, those can be grabbed with the controller, those can be moved, and those can also be manipulated with physics and gravity. So very few, but very important notes on setting up the scene for KeyVR, and especially the importance of having real size 1-to-1 scale models. So you have to make sure that all models have accurate sizes. So in KeyShot, when you have imported an object and it comes in too small, you can still render it correctly as an image by just playing around with the dolly distance of the camera to the object, and the focal length. So those are tricks you can use to basically make small objects appear large or large objects appear small. But this trick does not work in VR because it's basically, the headset is basically simulating your own vision. So, well, you still need your own vision for KeyVR, but it's simulating how you look at the real world. So there's no cheats possible there. So tiny objects will always look tiny and tiny objects will always be very hard to grab, and that's something very important to realize. So basically, the only way to make objects appear larger is by scaling them up. The only way to make objects appear small is by scaling them down. So if you, this section view here is a pretty good depiction of like what it means to have these, or what value it has. So here you can imagine this guy is basically entering a VR space, and to make it believable, you really have to make sure that all these interior pieces are true size. So a few notes on optimal model structure and tessellation. So the distribution of triangles and density of triangles in models, and how to work with materials. So for KeyVR, the triangle count, the amount of polygons, is very important. It's paramount to the performance. So the performance degrades with higher triangle counts. So more memory does not really help with performance, but it does allow you to load in larger models and more textures. And so I'm quickly going to hop into KeyShot to show this triangle count argument. So I have a few scenes here that I've already imported. So I have this motorcycle concept where I have imported with different tessellations. Let me just open this in KeyShot. So this was a step file where I used a tessellation value of 0.01 in the import. And if I expand this and look here at the FPS count, I can see I get 260 FPS. Now let me pause this and go into this folder again and use the much larger tessellation, the much denser. So this is imported with 0.1 tessellation. So see, so this one has 2 million triangles. So the lower tessellation. And this one has more than 11 million triangles, and here the performance is 150. So it's definitely less. But if we now look at this in KeyVR, so first I'm going to transfer this 0.01 model. So to transfer it to KeyVR, let me just close this here. I'm going to just click the KeyVR button. And that's going to transfer basically the model to the KeyVR application from KeyShot. So here, just in the desktop mode, I'm getting like 470 frames per second. I'm just going to quickly go out of this and open this higher tessellation version. So here I'm doing the same. So this is the 0.1 file with a lot more triangles. So again, it's going to load KeyVR and it's going to pull in the data from the KeyShot scene. So as you can see, significantly larger models also take a bit longer to set up. So now you can see performance has dropped a lot more than it actually did in KeyShot. So the KeyVR performance is very sensitive to the amount of triangles you have, and that's why you have to be very careful about the import settings and how many triangles you end up with. So we also kind of recommend using at least trying to fit your models within the 2 to 3 million range. Of course, there is some, this limit is a bit elastic, but that limit will give you at least the smoothest performance. And working with such limits also teaches you to basically try to be as efficient with the geometry as possible. It will pay dividends when you get deeper into KeyVR. So that's a bit about tessellation. So yeah, if you have CAD models like step files, always import the NURBS version of it. And so because you can control tessellation on import, if you include the NURBS data, then you can also retessellate inside KeyShot. So you have some control about the density of your meshes inside KeyShot. Another point about models is an important factor here is the locking state of the top level models, so the ones contained directly below the model sets. So basically, unlocked models allow you to move them, and locked models will fix them in space always. But again, I will show this in demonstration. So about materials, I just simply want to mention the manual again, and I'm actually going to open this KeyVR capabilities page. There's a lot I could show and tell about materials, but really the manual does a much better job than I could in this hour. So because it has a very complete overview of the shading and material capabilities. So if I click on this, then definitely check out this page. It has been very carefully crafted, and it shows all the features of KeyShot and then shows how it is supported inside KeyVR. What is supported will be shown in green, what is partly supported is shown in yellow, and what is not supported at the moment is shown in red. So you can see a lot of the materials have actually representations in KeyVR. The ones that we do not support yet are at least some of them are actually being worked on, and you can expect this list to become greener as we update the KeyVR product. There will always be discrepancies because KeyShot is doing ray tracing, KeyVR is doing rasterized rendering, so there will always be differences, but we're definitely trying to minimize them as much as possible. So another important section here, which you definitely should check out, is the texture map sections. So here it basically gives you an overview of the different mappings that are supported. So for textures, we actually support all the basic mapping types. What is not supported at the moment, though, is labels, but we have actually a working implementation that will be rolled out in a future update. So yeah, definitely check out this page. It's quite a good resource. So a few notes on best practices for optimal scene interactivity. So when you are moving models and switching materials, as I will show with this kind of boat model, it requires you to target geometry. So for instance, if you wanted to switch the material on this this large wide surface, you basically have to point with your controller on the surface. Now, for such a large surface, it's very easy. It's hard to miss that big surface. The same goes for the hull. It's quite easy to point and click on the surface. Now, if you wanted to change the material of the railing, it becomes quite hard. Like, it's a very fine geometry, especially from a distance. So this can become quite annoying, actually. So you cannot just target this. And then you have to think, can I link a material to another part that might have a very similar material. And in this case, it could be that this part, which is much thicker, can have the same material. Now, then I can much easier target that specific geometry. And then you can kind of use another piece of geometry as kind of a target object to switch materials. Then, yeah, physics. How you can use physics to increase the user engagement when juggling around with models. So how do the physics in KeyVR work? We do not have a full-blown motion simulation. What we do have is something that simulates gravity and collision between objects. So it operates on a model level, which means that every separate model in your scene tree contained in a model set will be able to interact with other models. And that applies to all models that are not locked, but again, I will show this later. So the control is very easy. There's just a single physics button, and there's a gravity slider to control the strength of the effect. So a few notes on best practices here. Keep it stupid simple. You want to limit the number of objects that can be moved, so because the physics are optimized for quick setup and basically for interactions between a handful of models. And the handful of models is really a key expression here. So don't try building a VR Jenga tower or a VR marble machine with 1,000 marbles. That will simply not work. So also avoid very thin geometry. So thin geometry like sheet geometry or like millimeter thick plane surfaces can cause odd protrusions and glitchy collisions. So you want to make sure that your geometry is like good thickness, so it can actually work with the physics engine. And the ground is also automatically basically a collision object, so you don't actually need to import a ground plane. So yeah, that's finally time for some demoing. And as I mentioned before, I showed in this slide, for the demonstration, I will be using a boat model, which will also be distributed as a KeyShot package. So the boat model is something I have found on GrabCAD by the user NSD Knight, and he has created a wonderful collection of boats actually, a lot of interesting details, and the CAD file here is a 3DM, so a Rhino model. And let me just start by loading this in Rhino. So in Rhino, so model tessellation is very important, and this, at least in the case of Rhino, already starts inside of Rhino. So Rhino in its properties has a mesh setting. So here I'm just using the jagged and faster meshing, and Rhino has this neat functionality where if you type polygon count and you calculate for all, it will actually throw out this number, so you can actually see how many polygons it will be creating. So in this case it's a bit hard to read, but it's 4,162,000 polygons. Now in Rhino I can just with a plugin I can actually just push this to KeyShot. So I just click the button here, and that opens KeyShot 8 for me, and then it transfers geometry, and this should be fairly fast. So now it's moving all the geometry, and with Rhino we have the benefit that it remains all the layers that we have, so that's nice and easy. Also when we try to move geometry in different groups for the physics, yeah, so now we have, if I here in KeyShot in the scene tab expand the model sets. I have one model set, the default one, and I have one model here. So with Rhino, you have the benefit that it also transfers the NURBS, and here you can actually see the same number as in Rhino. So 4,162,000. Oh, it's actually, yeah, it's exactly the same. So that's nice. So if we now want to see what this looks like in KeyVR, I'm actually going to save this scene first. So I will press save, and then I will go into find some folder to dump it in, and I will call this demo boat. So now that scene is saved, let me just add a more interesting environment as well. Oops. Yeah, so instead of the default startup, I will just drag and drop one of the studio environments into there. And yeah, so now I can just click KeyVR. And then it will open KeyVR and then start transferring the geometry to the KeyVR application. See, yeah. So depending on how many components the model has and how dense they are, this can take, yeah, more or less time. It should be decently fast, but one thing to note here is that we currently do not have this link between, oh sorry, so now my headset is connected, so it's going to already be here in the VR mode. So now I cannot interact with my scene with the mouse. So if I want to do that, I have to switch it here with this toggle to the desktop mode, and now I can use the same camera controls as I'm used to from KeyShot. And now I am seeing the design here in VR. And the reason I pushed it over so quickly is that I want to evaluate the performance. And I'm actually getting in desktop mode a very high frame rate. And also here in the KeyVR, I am, yeah, well within the acceptable performance level. So it's actually hitting like almost 90 frames per second. So that's nice. So now I know that at least my geometry is fit for KeyVR. Of course, the materials now are very basic, but we can address that later. So, but as I mentioned, once we do not have a direct link between KeyShot and KeyVR yet. So if I now, for instance, go into the environment tab, and let me call this environment Studio, and let me create another one, and let me call this OpenSea, because I have a nice OpenSea environment. I'm actually not sure about the number I should use, but let me just try. No, that's not the one. Oh, no, I accidentally double-clicked it. Yeah, let's use this one. So it's a nice OpenSea environment, and now the boat is kind of weirdly floating in a bowl of sea. And let me just increase the brightness here. So one thing you can do in KeyShot that is also respected inside KeyVR is to flatten the ground. So now you're actually flattening the surface, and this works together with the height. So if I lower the height, something like this, it's going to give at least the impression that there's some surface, some ocean surface. Now I'm not going to care about the alignment. It's just to give the impression that there's some interesting environment, and in close-ups it actually works quite well. So this setting is also respected inside KeyVR. So now I've made this change. If I now wanted to see this inside KeyVR, there's actually no way currently I can push that update. So I would have to click this button again, and then it's going to transfer all the content. So that means that if you're doing a lot of back and forth might take some time. So what I recommend doing is doing setup, and let me just close this, like making environments, making multi-materials. Try to do as much as possible within reason, and then do like a push to KeyVR after some amount of changes. So let me save this. So now I have a studio, OpenC, and let me just add another one, and let me take, for instance, it's not going to make sense, but let me put this inside a parking lot, like this. So now I have 3 environments. So now for the cameras, I can go to my camera. So these cameras were actually imported from Rhino. Let me just throw these out because I want my own cameras. And I'm going to be a bit sloppy about the exact placement, but one tool I find very useful here is to use the geometry view to get a sense of the scale or the position of the cameras relative to the models, because it's not always clear from the real-time view. So I press the O button, the O key, or here in the ribbon in KeyShot. This gets me the geometry view, and now I can zoom out. And if I zoom out, I can now see the position of my camera relative to my object. And what I like, this is maybe personal, but what I like to do here to move the camera is to right click in the geometry view and then use the move active camera. I keep view direction. I can just move this and actually see relative distances to geometry much clearer than in the real-time view. So I can, if I'm happy with this view, I can just grade the camera. This is the front camera, and then I move it to the back. And then I create another camera called back, and then one from the top like this. And this is then top down. So now I have 3 cameras I can switch between, and those I can actually leverage inside KeyVR. And I want to create a few material variations as well. So what I can do here, and again, now I'm doing the setup from scratch. I actually have a fully prepared scene, which I can open in a few minutes as well. But I just want to show you the basic setup for a fresh scene basically. And the final scene will also be shared later on. So for the hull here, I want to have basically a few paints. So I double click the hull. Let me close the geometry view. So if I double click the hull, I get the material properties, and let me remove these RGB numbers. So now if I want to switch between variations inside KeyVR, I have to create a multi-material. I can just simply click the multi-material button, and then I get a list where I can add submaterials or variations. So this one I can call red paint. It's fine if it's a plastic. So, and then maybe I give it some roughness, and then I want to create some color variations. So I can just duplicate multiple times, and then I want to have a white paint, change the color to white, and then I want a blue paint, then I change the color to blue, maybe a more marine blue, and then I want black paint. Change this to black, and I'm also going to make the railing a few different materials. So I'll start with making it a chrome, and then I make a few variations. So maybe another, so this one is chrome, change the material name to railing, and then I make a few variations. So maybe I want to see what this looks like in a matte kind of dark gray finish. And then maybe for security purposes, I want one that is bright yellow. So now I have a few variations. And like I showed in the presentation, I'm actually going to like shift left click and shift right click and paste this onto another piece of geometry. So that's fine for now. I'm also going to do some setup already for physics. So here, for instance, I have these live buoys, or what they call it in English. So this is actually this is contained within this structure. So what I want to do is maybe grab this buoy and throw it around and make it bounce off the ship, the boat geometry. So to make it movable, I basically have to put this as a group underneath the model set. So in this case, I have to rejuggle the geometry. So I'm going to select the necessary parts. Performance mode does sometimes help to get a clear overview without it constantly refreshing the rendering. So I'm going to select these parts that now I have them all. I'm going to right click in the scene tree and I'm going to add them to a group, and I will select here at the top for that model set, create a new group and call this, I hope this is the correct spelling, and then okay. Now this changes the hierarchy, but maybe that's okay for my purposes. And now I have this separate object, which I can now use for physics, moving, etc. The boat I actually want to not be affected by physics. I want to stay fixed. So I can just, for that to happen, I actually have to make it locked. So I select the group of the whole boat, excluding the buoy, and then I lock it. So now I have something that I can actually configure in detail already in KeyVR. Oh, so my camera is in an unsafe state. Let me just make sure it's like this. So now I have cameras, I have environments, I have materials, I have an interesting, you could say, setup of models. So now I can actually have the full experience inside KeyVR. So I click KeyVR, and now again the scene is going to be transferred. And as I say this, the sun is blasting in my face in Denmark, so it's actually an excellent opportunity to put on the HTC Vive headset, because now I want to show the interaction schemes we have inside KeyVR with the actual headset. Because now, before we were just playing around in the desktop mode, so now we'll actually use both controllers as well. So as the scene loads, just a few explanations here about the UI. So we can switch here between desktop VR mode. VR mode is what I'm going to use now. It actually also gives an overview of the functions for the left and right controller. The interesting thing with KeyVR is you can have different functions to separate controllers. Let me just switch the other one on. And you can see as I switched it on, it actually becomes available. I can switch the mode here, or I can do it inside the VR environment. So now I'm holding the headset device, and you can see as I move this, and I will try to do it slowly as possible because the webinar streaming will be a bit choppy if I do it too fast. But you can see now that my preview here, let me pause KeyShot, that's important to remember. Do not waste CPU time, just pause KeyShot and then open it here. So yeah, I'm not going to spend too much time explaining this. I'm just going to hop into VR, and you should be seeing the full size preview. I'm just going to make it a little bit smaller because it will make it look a bit smoother for you guys. We are actually making a separate recording of this, which will be much smoother. So I put the headset on now, and now I take both controllers in my hand, and this is a bit juggling because I have to see if you're actually seeing what I'm seeing. So you should be seeing my controllers, and as I hold them in front of me, I can see that they have different modes already. So here you see the HTC Vive controller, because that's the ones I'm using, and you should see this big black button on the top of it. If I press and hold that button, I'm presented with a menu where I can just vertically select different functions. So the first one I'm going to try is to select camera, and here, sorry, we just use the fly mode, so I'm going to use fly mode instead. With fly mode, if you pull the trigger, you can basically fly through your scene. Now, if you fly way off and your object gets out of view, what you can do on the Vive is swipe that black surface, that big black button. If you swipe it left and right, you're basically rotating. If you point it backwards and then pull the trigger, point basically over your shoulder, you can basically fly backwards. Let me now try the select camera again. So for some reason, I'm only seeing that camera. I'm not going to bother. So I'm flying to where I want to go because I want to switch some materials. So again, I can swipe this surface, and now I want to see like a different material for the hull. So I press and hold that big black button again, and then I go to the switch material function. And now I hope you noticed, it's probably not noticeable on the webinar, but as you select a mode, it will briefly flash the objects that can actually be changed. In this case, the hull was flashing. So if I press the trigger here on the back of the 5 controller, the black trigger, I can actually swap between the different paints. And I know I have a multi-material here on the railing. So let me fly a bit closer. So if I wanted to change the material, I again do the switch material, and I can try to hit the railing, but it will be very hard. Like sometimes I get it, sometimes not. Again, I copy and linked it here on this surface, which is much easier to grab. So now I can just do this. So this is kind of a switching object now. So I can just change the material. Let me again fly out a bit, and now I want to use the switch environment. And because now I have these different environments in the list, I can just press the trigger and that will load the different environments. And you can actually see that the light is casting from the environment onto the geometry, and it actually makes for quite a scenic kind of looking scene already. So with the environment, if you press and hold the trigger, you actually get this grid view where you can navigate horizontally and vertically by just moving the controller in those directions. And you can put it on a parking lot or switch back to the open sea. If I want to inspect reflections, I can actually rotate the environment. So for that, I have to go to the Move Objects mode, which is the one with the small hand. And then I get a hand in front of my controller, which indicates the mode. So that's nice. So I can move, obviously, objects. But if I just point in empty space, which is the HDRI environment, if I point in the direction of the environment and pull the trigger and hold it, I can actually move and rotate the environment around. So that way I can actually make a reflection study of models. So that's very, very nice if you have like curved geometry like the hull or here the roof. You can actually inspect it quite well. Now, if we really want to have some fun, we can actually play around with the buoy we there made as a separate object. So I'm going to fly in front of it over this railing, and then again swipe over the surface so I'm facing it. So I'm going to hold the black button, go to Move Objects. You can see it flashed there for a second. So that means if I target it and then click with the trigger, I can actually pull it out. Now, if I release it, it will just float in, basically float in space, as if it's quite unrealistic. Now, to make it be acted upon by physics, I have to again press this black button and then enable physics. And then you can see it actually bumbles about, and I can, if I then pick it up, you can see it turns into kind of a lasso or kind of wobbly effect. And then so now if I want to face the sea, what I can actually do, and this is very interesting, so now I'm using one controller to hold this bungee kind of buoy. And then with the other controller, the left one, I can actually change it to fly mode. And then I can fly somewhere else, or I can swipe the surface, and then I can actually move around while still keeping hold of this buoy. And now I can toss it somewhere. And now you can see it's, of course, it's not making waves or something. That's not how advanced it is, but it's basically interacting with the ground plane, which is the flattened environment surface. And even though it's kind of a fake effect, it conveys this kind of open sea feeling. So, and now being in VR, I lost track of time, but let me just fly out. You can see as I enabled physics, the boat stayed put. And that's because we locked it inside KeyShot. Now, if we wanted that buoy to be in the original location, I could actually try to grab it with the move object. I could try and grab it and put it back in place. That was a decent attempt, but I can actually just hold the button again, and then right at the bottom there's a reset object positions toggle. If I hover over that and then release, it will actually automatically put the buoy in that position. Now taking off the headset, and we're running a bit over time here, but maybe for the next 5 minutes I do want to show the final scene that I actually prepared and that I'm also going to share with you guys because it's a bit more interesting. So because one thing I didn't show here is switching between model sets, and that requires you to actually have different model sets, and that's something I prepared in the scene I am opening now. So the scene, this version of the scene actually has 5 different boats. So here in the scene tab you can see these nice previews of, and if I double click between the model sets, you can see I actually have 5 models. So in this version, which is a much cleaned up boat of the one I showed before, also this one is locked, so it will not be budged inside KeyVR. The hovercraft is as well. These last 2 actually have no locked states, or at least they are all unlocked, and I will show that as well, what effect that has. So here I also have different environments, different cameras. Here the cameras should work. So again, just going to click KeyVR, and then all that data is going to be transferred. So this may take a little longer. It should not take very long, but it's a lot more, it's more geometry. It's got 5 models of a few million polygons. But you get some nice feedback here actually in the loading screen. So as it gets through the models, you will actually see it's loading the environments. So all of that data is pushed into the GPU memory. Then it's going through all the geometry. So at least you have an idea what it's doing. If you have a lot of textures on the models, that may also increase the loading time, because I believe that they are will have to be loaded uncompressed. But you can see there's a lot of objects here, like almost 3,000, and it's streaming them quite fast. So that's actually already done. When it says calculating signed distance fields, that's basically a simulation, a calculation it's doing for ambient occlusion. So now we're already here, and So again, let me pop this out and make sure I pause KeyShot. And I'm going to make this slightly, the preview slightly larger, like this. And again, I'm going to put the headset on my head, and I'm going to grab the controllers. So yeah, this mode here is also something I haven't shown. So when you get this kind of fishing rod behavior with a lasso, it's because you're in the teleport body. That means you can point somewhere, but it will work in relatively short distances. So if it's like up for objects as large as this boat, you will have to do multiple teleports. Now you can see, like, as you're close to the ship, you get a real sense of scale. Like, it's not a massive ship, but it's a decently sized boat. So again, let me go there. And so we have the different, so here we also have the different multi-materials. So again, I can click here and I made some more, so you can make different variations. But to show the different boats, I'm going to hold the black button again, and I'm going to use the switch model set mode. And then I get this model set icon here. Now if I press the trigger, I can actually move, or at least let me fly closer with the other controller. Sorry. I'm going to fly out a bit closer. Yeah. So if I press the trigger, I can now actually see the different models I have. And I think the hovercraft is particularly interesting. So there's some nice shape. Also here, with the other controller, I can select, oops, sorry, meant to select the material, like this. So I can change the material. And for the fan casing, so it's pretty neat. Go to the other, and so let me go back to this one. So if I now enable physics, you can see I made those in separate groups, so you can see the boys are interacting with the locked ship. So if I now you can see the physics are active when I switch to the other model set, and this model set, the boat was not locked. So now it means that it's, as I enable the physics, it will kind of tumble and fall, which may look a bit silly, but what it does allow me to do is actually move the boat itself. So if I now go into the move object mode, I can actually point at it and I can spin it around. If I hold it, like if I tumble it around, and then if, for instance, with the other controller, I now switch out the physics, I can actually like fix it in space. And then I can play around with a massive boat like it was a rubber toy or something. But you can actually use this to like inspect features. And if you want to reset it, you can just open the menu again and reset the object, and that will just reset everything. Let me go back to this bigger boat, and let me fly to an interesting detail like this mast. One fun detail we added here is we added different flags with the nationalities of the people in our offices. So let me switch the environment. So this is a pretty nice one as well. So let's say I'm reviewing this mask setup of the different sensors, and I wanted an image that I can then later reference. So what I can do here as well is to go up in the menu and take a screenshot, and that basically gives me this kind of a Polaroid kind of interface or a frame, and here I can actually move it and find a good framing, and then if I'm happy with what I'm seeing in the frame, I can just press the trigger. Oops, I'm hitting the... So I can take some screenshots, and now say the design review is over, I can just pull off my headset, and let me just dock this back, the preview inside the KeyVR window, and you can actually see that it's pretty nice. When you switch back to desktop mode, you're basically left at that position you left with the headset, so you can still move around with the camera. And here at the screenshot section here, I can actually directly go to the screenshot folder, and it will actually mention I have 2 new screenshots. So if I go there, then it opens for me the screenshot folder, and then here, if I double click these, and then I can, I guess, rotate it, I actually have a screenshot of the exact view where I captured it with the controller. So that's really nice. That's something that you can annotate later on, or attach to emails, or discuss with your design manager or boss or colleagues. So it's quite powerful as a communication tool. And I think we have many possibilities there for future improvements to make it even more engaging. So I'm aware I'm well over time here. So I'm going to stop it here, because that's basically what I had. Should anyone have any questions? Yeah, if you hadn't, maybe we can, I'm not sure, Josh, if you have 5 minutes or so, if there's anything particular that needs pointing out, then we can definitely do that. Yeah, I also want to mention, if you're not a KeyShot user yet, but you're interested in what you saw, then you can always get a trial on our website. So you follow this link, then you get a lot of the same information here, but you can also fill in this form. It will mention the price of the product. If you're still interested, you can fill out your details, and then we'll get in touch with you and set you up with a trial as fast as possible, because we definitely want to see how you will be able to use KeyVR. There's a lot of great possibilities, especially with the spatial component, with the true size aspect of it. So definitely reach out to us. We're very interested to know how it can be of use to you. Yeah. If there are any questions, then I'm happy to answer them.
Hey, Dries, great job. I do think it's important to discuss interiors a little bit. We had some questions come up regarding lighting of interiors. So at the moment, the lighting comes from the HDRI environment. So if you have a fully enclosed interior, it's going to be tough to actually see what's inside of there, because currently the physical lights aren't supported. So do you have any tips on viewing interiors in KeyVR, some maybe workarounds?
Yeah, you use as many windows as possible. But like if you do create like enclosed spaces with a lot of walls, it will create this very blank and kind of claustrophobic kind of experience. So I think actually adding like geometric details that allow the ambient occlusion to do its work does help as well. Like if you have a table or something, or some details, geometric details, it would actually create some kind of ambient occlusion, like as if it were like an overcast day with some soft shadows. So that does help. But yeah, enclosed interiors is definitely going to be, well, it's going to be more challenging than making this open space environment. So actually, I would try, unless you're actually designing interiors, if you want to present a product inside an interior, to just use good HDRIs as much as possible. So if you have HDRIs of interior spaces, try to use those. The ones I showed today were kind of low resolution, but we actually, if your environment is like very high res, it will actually, KeyVR will benefit from that as well. So if you want to show a product inside a showroom, try to get a representative showroom HDRI. I think that's the, at least for the best visual experience, that's would be my tip.
Yeah, or if possible, perhaps hide a wall or two,
Yeah,
like
make
you've
it more
shown
like a
it.
booth. Yeah,
Hmm.
make it into a booth. Actually, just like we show on the KeyVR, website. So where we have this image. So do something like this, like break up a wall, or maybe even, if possible, remove the ceiling, or like make it breathe a little more. There's some stuff we are looking into, like baking lighting in KeyShot. So that's something I think is safe to say is on the radar for the future release, where if you have textures or lighting in KeyShot that you're able to bake it into the geometry, it's definitely something we are looking into, and that would benefit definitely scenes like these. It's not something for like the immediate next version, but it's something that's definitely on our radar, I think it's safe to say.
Jesper and Josh, did you guys want to have Dries discuss any other questions?
There was one question on your specs again, the slide with the specs on it.
Yeah, let me just go back. Nope. Yeah, this one.
I think they just wanted to see the specs again.
Yeah, I think the most important one here, at least for the experience, is the graphics card. Yeah, the ones I highlighted here in bold. So I think the NVIDIA RTX 2080 is definitely a very good card for this, because it has 8 gigabytes of memory, which it maybe should have mentioned here. So it has 8 gigabytes of memory, so it can fit a decent chunk of geometry and environments and textures. And it's still relatively affordable. Of course, if your scene gets very large and you need the amount of memory, you're kind of, you have to look at the Quadro options. Yeah, as mentioned before, the scene I showed at the end will be made available. So if you already are a KeyVR customer, or you get the trial, then you can play around with it as well.
Excellent. Well, I think that's it for today. Thank you everyone for joining us and Dries in this presentation of KeyVR. For more learning content, you can always visit our YouTube page at youtube.com/KeyShot3D, where you'll find more webinars, quick tips, and tutorials. And yeah, hopefully we will see you again next month.
See you guys. Have a nice day.